The wait is finally over. Much teased, occasionally leaked, Shimano Dura-Ace R9200 is here. Dura-Ace is Shimano's flagship, top tier, best of everything racing group set. In its latest incarnation, it is 12-speed, semi-wireless and electronic only. You heard that right, mechanical shifting is dead. As well as an extra sprocket at the back, new 12-speed Dura-Ace features better shifting, better braking, and all the smaller refinements and tweaks that you'd expect from Shimano. Incidentally, at the same time as launching a new racing flagship, Shimano is bringing out Ultegra R8100, the second tier group set, which benefits from many of the same technologies, and as ever with Ultegra, is simply a bit cheaper, a bit heavier, and a little less blingy. If you want to know more about Ultegra and get the full rundown on both group sets, don't miss our full coverage on BikeRadar.com. There's a link in the description below this video. As well as the group set, Shimano is also bringing out matching Dura-Ace and Ultegra wheel sets. We'll talk more about those later. First of all, let's talk through the headlines on Dura-Ace R9200. With no mechanical Dura-Ace option, there are two versions of R9200, the disc brake one and the rim brake one. We've got the disc brake one here, and it's the version that Shimano has focused most of its development efforts on. The rim brake R2950 levers look very, very similar to the previous generation R9150 levers, but the disc brake model looks completely new. It has a fully updated look, new ergonomics, and it's kind of the signature for Shimano now. Shimano's new hydraulic levers are wireless, so the derailleurs and battery are wired together at one end of your bike, and the levers are individually powered by tiny coin cells, and they're not physically wired to anything, although you can physically wire them if you want to. By contrast, the rim brake version still uses a wired connection for the levers because they are almost the same levers as the previous generation. New Dura-Ace is 12-speed and 2x only. Shimano is not embracing 1x group sets for pure road usage. If you want 1x and drop bars, GRX is still where it's at when it comes to Shimano. Also, despite moving to 12-speed, Shimano hasn't radically changed its approach to gearing. All of its cassettes still start with an 11-tooth cog, but they have very slightly tweaked things in terms of cassette ratios, and they're now offering a 54-39 crank, where previously it was a 53-39 at the top end. Dura-Ace's gearing is lower than it's ever been before though, with an 11-34 cassette option, which is exceptional for a group set that used to be focused purely on the needs of hardcore road racers. We did wonder if Shimano was going to embrace micro spline, its existing new free hub standard on the mountain bike side, when it went 12-speed on the road. Interestingly, that hasn't happened. Shimano has introduced a new free hub, but the new Dura-Ace R9200 group set is backwards compatible with existing free hub, so you don't need to replace your wheels if you don't want to. At the same time, the new wheel sets feature a new free hub that is not backwards compatible with previous group sets. New Dura-Ace promises to be better in every way that matters. Interestingly, it's not, according to Shimano, actually lighter than the previous generation. Shimano says that R9200, for a complete disc group set without power meter, there's a power meter option, weighs 2,439 grams, a tiny increase of 35 grams over the previous generation. I am going to get into the specifics of every component on this bike, but before I do that, let's talk about what it's like to ride. Shimano set us up with this Dogma F, which is Pinarello's latest, greatest Tour de France level pro bike, and it's a pretty incredible machine. And Spoiler alert, while we haven't had this long enough to give a full review of Dura-Ace yet, it's a pretty incredible group set. We're used to Di2 being incredibly competent, but this really takes things up a level. It is pretty well impossible to fluster. You can mash the buttons on both shifters at the same time and it just sorts it out. And the shift from little ring to big ring on the front is just bang, just like that. It is really something to behold, and I'm really excited to spend a bit more time with this new generation of group sets. In other respects, if you are used to Shimano's top-end kit, nothing about the new group set is going to feel that surprising. The shifter ergonomics have been tweaked. They're a bit bigger than they were before. Some people didn't like how small the old Di2 shifters were, and Shimano's listened to that and made them that little bit larger. There's a bit more grip to rest your hands on. Di2's rear shifting was already excellent, and now it's better than ever. They've adopted a cassette design that debuted with the XTR M9100 mountain bike group set. It's called Hyperglide Plus, and the idea basically is that you can shift under full load, according to Shimano. That means not having to ease up on the pedals. If you want some numbers, Shimano says the rear shifting is 58% faster than the previous generation group set, and the front shifting is 45% faster. But I can tell you, in use, it's the front shifting that is most noticeable because it is just wow fast when you press that button. Right, let's talk about individual components of this group set. The levers are in many ways the most visually striking part of the group set and the biggest departure from previous designs. Previous Shimano group sets had a fully exposed brake lever, but on the new design, everything above the pivot is hidden and there's a sort of shroud over the front of the lever. It looks more aerodynamic. Shimano hasn't made any specific claims about that, but it probably is. The overall shifting arrangement hasn't changed at all. You've still got separate buttons for up and down on both sides, and there's also an extra hidden button on top of the hoods that you can assign to various functions, and you can customize that stuff via the eTube app that accompanies Di2. According to Shimano, these levers weigh 350 grams for a pair, and they can be accompanied by satellite, sprint or climbing shifters if you want them. This bike is set up with climbing shifters on the tops of the bars. Another key change is to braking. Like Shimano's GRX gravel shifters, these levers have servo-wave braking, which is where there's a non-linear relationship between lever and pad travel that's supposed to give you a better overall combination of power and control. New Dura-Ace gets that, and also the free stroke in the lever has been reduced, so that means less movement before your pads bite. As I said previously, the rim brake version of these levers looks much more like the previous generation and doesn't get all of those updates. However, new Dura-Ace features skinnier wiring than the previous generation, so everything isn't immediately compatible, although I believe that an adapter will be available to make that possible. The rim brake levers also must be run wired, they are not wireless. Right, moving on to the back of the bike, let's talk about the rear derailleur. The rear derailleur performs all of the functions that used to be in a junction box. That means there's a charging port, an indicator LED, and a mode selection switch, all on the rear derailleur. The rear derailleur also houses the wireless componentry, and it's the part that talks to the levers, and then it also sends signals to the front derailleur and is also obviously physically wired to the main central battery. That's a key improvement over the previous generation of Di2 that relied on a separate inline wireless adapter that you had to buy as a separate component if you wanted to take advantage of that functionality. There's only one Dura-Ace rear derailleur to cover all component combinations, so that means that even if you're running the rim brake levers, which again are not wireless, you've still got the wireless functionality in the rear derailleur. It also covers all possible gear combinations, and with the larger cassettes that Dura-Ace now offers, that means that it's got greater capacity. According to Shimano, the rear derailleur weighs 215 grams. The new Dura-Ace front derailleur is smaller, sleeker and a little bit lighter than the previous generation. Shimano says that it's got 33% less frontal area, which should mean a small aerodynamic gain over the previous model. It's got capacity for large chain rings between 50 tooth and 55 tooth for you time trialists, and according to Shimano, it weighs 96 grams. Just as a reminder, the front derailleur is physically wired to the battery, and the battery normally lives inside your seat tube or your seat post. According to Shimano, the battery will give you about 1,000 kilometers of riding with typical usage, and it's recharged via that port on the rear derailleur. The other truly aesthetically defining part of a Groupset is, of course, its crank. Shimano hasn't gone completely radical, it hasn't redesigned things. It's stuck with its existing Hollowtech 2 design, which is a hollow aluminium construction that's very stiff and light. And it's still a 24mm spindle, so there's no issues of bottom bracket compatibility to worry about. It's also still a 4-arm spider as before, and really the main difference here is aesthetic. It's more angular than it was before, and it doesn't have that fade colour scheme going on. It's essentially all glossy black now. As I said, Shimano hasn't radically shaken up its gearing. You have 3 choices essentially. Their standard double is now a 5439. The semi-compact is still 5236, and of course there is a compact 5034 as well. One nice detail is that Shimano offers quite a wide range of crank lengths, everything from 160mm all the way up to 177.5. According to Shimano, the crank weighs 690 grams. That would be for a 5236 with 170mm crank arms, which interestingly is actually a small increase over the previous generation. Previous generation Dura-Ace Groupsets didn't let you fit big cassettes that were more amateur riding friendly. The last generation topped out at an 11 to 30 cassette. That's all changed with R9200, and there are 3 choices of cassette: an 11 to 28, an 11 to 30, and an 11 to 34, which a few years ago would have been a mountain bike cassette. Although Shimano has not embraced smaller cogs, they have tweaked things on the gearing slightly, and so the jumps between the gears are slightly different in the middle of the cassette. Otherwise though, the ranges are pretty standard. A typical setup for a racier rider might be a 5236 on the front and then an 11 to 30 at the back. All the new cassettes are compatible with existing 11-speed free hubs, but as I mentioned before, they are also compatible with the new free hub that currently only appears on the very newest Shimano wheels. Shimano says, incidentally, that an 11 to 30 cassette weighs 223 grams. Shimano has revamped the brake calipers for R9200. The changes aren't enormous, but they are important. First of all, pad spacing has been increased by 10%. That's not a huge adjustment, but it means that with the pad sitting a little bit wider, you're less likely to suffer annoying brake rub when you're sprinting out of the saddle and flexing your fork, or if you've got a very slightly bent rotor. The bleed port has been relocated for easier in situ bleeding, and there's now a separate valve screw that you can shut off. Claimed weight for a pair of calipers is 229 grams. You might have noticed, by the way, that there's another XTR component on this bike, and that is the brake rotors. Shimano has adopted this style of brake rotor for Dura-Ace as well as the mountain bike side. For the rim brake version of this group set, not a huge amount has changed. There's still a choice of standard single bolt calipers or direct mount ones, but basically they're identical to the previous generation. The final big announcement from Shimano is the wheels that accompany the new group sets. And for maybe the first time ever, Shimano is offering some wheel specs that are actually quite desirable. That's not to say Shimano wheels were bad in the past, but they've always been quite conservative on their specs. The new ones, however, offer usefully wide rims and a choice of depths to suit most riders. There are tubeless and tubular options at 36mm deep, 50mm deep and 60mm deep. The tubeless clincher is probably the one that's going to interest most of us, and they have an internal width of 21mm, which is a great match for pretty well any size road tyre. Externally, they're 28mm wide, which is wide enough to be useful for aerodynamic purposes because you don't want your rim to be narrower than your tyre, ideally. Shimano's also moved to what it calls a direct engagement free hub, which is a little bit like a DT Swiss ratchet conceptually, but with the components arranged slightly differently internally. So that's the complete R9200 group set. First impressions are that it's incredibly good at what it does. The ergonomics seem excellent, the shifting is outstanding as ever, there's plenty of scope to customize things, and the braking is really, really good. If I have one more emotional reaction to this group set, it's that I'm a little bit disappointed that it's not more radical in some way. Certainly on the aesthetic front, for example, it is not in any way bold. If anything, it is more conservative than R9100, which did at least have some kind of color variation. This is entirely black. Every single component is just glossy black. It's not that exciting to look at. I also can't help but be a tiny bit sad that mechanical Dura-Ace is no more, but I understand perfectly why Shimano has made the decision to stop making it. The reality is that from the professional racing side and the top end of the amateur market, the demand for really, really expensive mechanical group sets must be tiny now. But it was always nice that it was there as a kind of prestige thing. And as I've said in the past, given the choice between, say, Ultegra Di2 and similarly priced Dura-Ace Mechanical, my heart would be drawn to Dura-Ace Mechanical because it's the pinnacle of mechanical shifting. We knew new Dura-Ace was going to be good. It's the very best Shimano makes. It's the flagship product, and you know that it's going to be refined. First impressions of this group set are overwhelmingly positive, even if it isn't radical in some of the ways that perhaps it could have been. And I can say right now that this is the best front shifting on the market, without a doubt. As ever, I'd love to know what you think of this group set. Does it stir you? Does it fill you with desire, or is it just too somber and conservative for your taste? Do let us know in the comments. On a more personal note, thank you to everyone who's ever watched one of my BikeRadar videos. This is going to be the last one. You might catch a little glimpse of me in another one, but essentially, this is it. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a complete pleasure to talk nothing but bikes with you. If you want to know what I'm up to next, follow me on Instagram at Matthew C. Loveridge. But for now, don't forget to like and subscribe to BikeRadar. And as ever, hit that little bell icon so you get notified every time BikeRadar, but not me, uploads another video. Goodbye.